His dad seemed more impressed than he did, but nevertheless, Conor Benn marches on and is now a real prospect for Great Britain. This is After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's boxing show in association with Betfair.
Hey, it's the WBA heavyweight champion of the world!
Float like a butterfly and sting like a bee.
The Mirror brings you After the Bell in association with Betfair.
Hello and welcome to this week's show. Our usual lineup of guests, myself, Martin Domin, George Groves and Declan Taylor. Plenty to pack in this week. We'll start with a look back at Conor Benn's win over Sebastian Formella. Very one-sided in the end as the young man continues to progress. We'll take a quick look at two very quick heavyweight fights as Alen, Babic and Fabio Wardley continue their unbeaten runs. Then we'll look ahead to a real heavyweight fight as Daniel Dubois and Joyce clash this weekend in a fight with real consequences in the Division 1. We'll go on probably to heavyweight world title honours. And the other, back to the drawing board. We'll take a look very briefly at Mike Tyson's return against Roy Jones Jr. Question whether it should be happening, what we really want to see from the spectacle. And then finally, we'll reflect on the news that Canelo Alvarez will take on Callum Smith just 6 days before Christmas. But first, Conor Benn. Gents, it was billed as a relative 50-50 fight beforehand. In the end, Conor made it look quite comfortable. George, were you impressed with what you've seen, given he's had a year to sort of work in the gym and just improve, rather improve in the gym rather than improve in the ring?
Yeah, no, I was very impressed with Conor Benn. I thought that was his best performance yet. I saw a lot of improvements that I hadn't seen before. And then you're looking up his box rec. It's been a year since he's been in the ring, so he is a diligent pro. I know that. I know that he tries to leave no stone unturned. He wants to better himself. He's happy to listen to the people around him and try and learn and improve as a fighter. And now I think he's at that stage now where you can't really be talking about him as an inexperienced prospect. You know, he's got, I think he's 17-0 now, and he's got to be way on his way now to be pushing for huge domestic fights up to championship level. That was the only shocking thing that I realised, was that he's still, that was a 10-rounder last night, and I think it would have been good for him to have scheduled for a 12-rounder, and even if he hadn't got rid of Formella, that he would have got that 12 rounds under his belt. So it's another thing to bank in the locker and know that you could do the full 12 rounds. What he does very well is he starts from the get-go, and straight away all his opponents know they're in a fight from the get-go. There's no real easing into a fight, and he's not necessarily reckless with it. You know, this is part comparison to his dad, which I don't want to do because everyone else jumps on that. And his dad was all action from the very beginning. But sometimes, I'm sure he won't mind me say, is there'll be an uneducated risk element that was being part of Nigel Benn's fights back in the day, where he would just dive in and, he's got off the floor in the first round to win fights. He's got caught and buzzed in the first round and gone on to win fights. But Conor, he starts fast. His mind is definitely switched on. So whatever he's doing in the changing room beforehand is perfect, because, that first bell goes and he's on the attack, and he's stalking and he's landing big shots. I listed down some things that I thought we had and that could compete, at world level. And his head movement is brilliant. His feet have improved a lot. So with the tiny adjustments that he makes, not so much with the attack, because he's always had that, but now with his defensive movements, his speed and power is good. His punch variety is brilliant. His mindset is brilliant. And his jab now is starting to have an authority to it, where I remember speaking to him, must be a couple of years ago now, and talking about, working on his jab, because, you can't always start a combination with a lead left hook or, just a power shot. Even though his jab last night was solid, it was hard, it was fast, it was varied. It was a stunning shot to the chest for Formella. It keeps him, stuck in his tracks, and then he'd change it upstairs, be knocking his head back. And the guy has always got to then constantly readjust and find his feet when he's getting knocked off balance with the jab. And it's a safe shot. From then, he would throw the arky right hand a lot, but every now and again would change it up with a fast 1-2, and then that would come straight to the target, straight through the guard, and knock the fella's head back. So lots and lots of great stuff from Conor Benn last night. The only thing I feel like he's got to work on now is he's got all these attributes. It's just knowing when to use them at the right time. So, you know, he can linger in range with the sharp head movement, but a lot of times he was getting caught with not necessarily big shots, but shots that would just knock him off balance. You have to go back and reset and go again. At a higher level, you don't want to be giving away them shots, because them shots, you only need the top level guys who've only got to touch you once and they know where you are. And the next shot's going to be followed up with a heavy power shot. So that's the next thing for him to work on. But the fight that he spoke about straight away after was the Josh Kelly fight. And I got to be honest, I think he beats Josh Kelly. Like, I thought that a year ago. I thought Josh Kelly's not making the improvements that we anticipated he would do. And I think Ben is now matured. He treats it like he goes into camp for these fights, and he has a big team, and they're not a big team of hangers-on as well. You know, he's got a big team because he feels that this is the way that he can harness every advantage possible. So whether it be in his nutrition, his strength and conditioning, obviously he's working with Tony Sims, and he's surrounded by lots of good fighters out of that gym who are bouncing off each other, and they're having success now there, and he's obviously getting great sparring. So I think he's enjoying his boxing. Even though he's still got that menace and that malice and that urge to fight mentality, he's now a little bit more refined. So he's not as reckless, and you haven't got to worry about him getting hurt or walking onto a shot or being making those silly mistakes. Very good performance, very, very good performance, and I was very happy with him. I thought he done really well.
Declan, I can't remember who said it, but somebody on the broadcast said often we have these polished amateurs coming into the pro game, and they've done so much of their development, and they just sort of have to fine tune it and get used to the sort of paid ranks. With Conor Benn, we've really watched him learn on the job, and as a high profile name, you know, he hasn't sort of been on the bottom of undercards or whatever. We've watched him under the lights all the way through, and really his progression has been impressive.
Yeah, massively. He turned up from Australia, where I think he had something like 20 fights, so they say. But, you know, he said he was boxing in a shed. And then he came over here as a total novice, and look what he's become now. And I think he got a lot of stick, actually, because he was totally underdeveloped, and he was obviously seen as this guy who got a lot of privilege because of his name. And I remember his debut was at the O2, and it was packed. It was late on a card. And, you know, the dad was in there, they were all dancing together. I don't know if you remember that. And then he's had the acid tests, like he had the Cedric Payno fight where he probably didn't, you know, he got lucky with the decision, but he got dropped a couple of times. So he had to come through that. And he's done all of this under the microscope. And I think it's made him a better fighter, a stronger fighter. He's done a lot of learning because as well, he turned up as a young man, and now I feel like he's grown matured, just the way he talks about it. And I think George hit the nail on the head. He's a diligent pro, and a lot of these guys would, with this sort of profile and exposure, maybe wouldn't have the hard work at the heart of it. But I think that's what he's all about. And he's got Dan Lawrence, one of George's old strength and conditioning coaches. He looks so strong because he looked very young and small when he first started boxing, because he was. Now he looks strong and fast and dangerous. And also I think massive credit has to go to Tony Sims, because he got him when he was totally raw, and now look what he's turned into. And that gym, you know, he was sparring a lot with O'Hara Davis when Davis was still there. You know, people like Martin J. Ward, John Ryder, obviously much bigger than him, but just having those guys around, he's learning and absorbing. And from what I can tell, he listens to everything that he hears. And the first thing he says when he gets out the ring is, "What was that? What could I do better? What was that like?" There's no arrogant, there's no edge. He just wants to fight, and he wants to improve, and he wants to be as best as he can be. And I think people have fallen in love with him as well, because, yeah, like I said, he was figure of fun, probably a bit much, but he was seen as this sort of epitome of the matchroom kind of, I don't know, maybe substance or style over substance, a big name and whoever he is, like, it doesn't even matter if he's good or not. Let's get him in big fights. And to be fair, he's in a 10-rounder at the top of a bill. So it does tell you that maybe he's been pushed. Well, he's clearly been pushed, and maybe his development would have been different if he wasn't called Conor Benn and he was just working away. But I think it's helped him actually, because he's had to grow and improve under the microscope. And I think he's a really exciting fighter. And he's one of them where it's the day after and you're literally already thinking, I'd love to see him fight him. I'd love to see him fight him. And there's not many boxers who are like that these days. And all I hope, because I don't know if you know this, but Sebastian Formella actually boxed Sean Porter once. They didn't mention it. They didn't mention it on Sky, but yeah, he went in with Sean Porter, the guy from America, former world champion. Yeah, he's good. And Formella boxed him. So all I'm worried about is because before this fight, there was a board order. The board ordered Chris Jenkins and Conor Benn purse bids. And Matchroom stepped away from it as far as we could tell, and they went for Formella instead of boxing Chris Jenkins for the British title, which would have been a great fight and still would be a great fight. So what's the strategy now? The idea of them now pushing him on, or not beat up, but pushing him in that way, where you get Sebastian Formellas and people like that, instead of Chris Congo, instead of Chris Jenkins, instead of Josh Kelly, that would be a travesty. Now, why not? Just like his dad did, why not now stick domestic as in British fighters, not domestic level, but stick with those guys. And why don't they get that division, which is hot, get them all boxing, get them all fighting, because they've got the platform. I think it would be an amazing time for that division, amazing time for British boxing. That is the plea, because if he goes and boxes for WBA Intercontinentals every 6 months, that would be a total travesty.
You're right, absolutely right. And actually looking at the WBA rankings, there are some less than stellar names.
It's happening already. Like, they could do that if they wanted, and people are still going to watch. But let's hope they don't.
And you also mentioned that people are falling in love with him. I think this was an opportunity. He was always going to be a big name on this card, but of course he should have been in behind White and Povetkin. So he really, I think, took the fact that he was the main event seriously. He had that interview where he sort of broke down a bit. And I think that endeared him to a lot of people. And then he put on the performance he did. George, you mentioned Josh Kelly. From what Eddie Hearn said, the plan is Josh Kelly fights David Avanesyan end of January. And then they want to do Kelly Benn next summer with fans. So presumably Conor Benn has to fight somebody in the interim. And this comes back to what Dex said. It was so easy to put him in with, to basically drop him down a level. But surely the key now is that he fights, as Dex said, somebody maybe progresses again, basically.
Yeah, I think even in terms of profile, in terms of building his brand in the UK, fighting a Chris Congo or a Chris Jenkins might not necessarily do that much better than fighting as a relatively unknown for a WBA in the Continental, from someone they bring in from across the world who might have one good win on his record, or gone the distance with an ex-world champion or something. But in terms of a fighter's own development, you need to come through them domestic clashes, in as you're rising through the ranks, because there is an element that's slightly different when it's the domestic, and you might hear some British fans who you would usually be on your side batting for the other team because they have an affiliation with that fighter, or they might just be fond of that fighter. I think that'll be good for Ben. A Congo fight or a Jenkins fight, even if it was back to back, sort of pressure fight where it's a domestic, and then he comes through that, and if he does, he fights Kelly. If Kelly comes through his fight, so Conor obviously wants to be concentrating on himself. He's not in a position where he needs to rely on someone else to make a fight for him. Kelly might come on stack and not win his fight in January. I think he's in a tough fight. And it's been a while. I'm not sure exactly when he last fought, but so that's not a foregone conclusion. But you look at the huge names you've got at welterweight. The champions you've got. This is a great time to sort of gain all your experience fighting really good opposition, and as you say, Dave, not at domestic level, but domestic opposition. So before you start thinking about fighting the Garcias or the Furmans or the Pacquiaos or anyone like that, because that would be where you aspire to be. Conor Benn at 24 years of age, that's where he wants to be. He wants to follow in other British fighters' footsteps to become world champion. So, but he needs the experience to get there. And I think he's starting to really believe in his ability now. He's got proof in the pudding with these wins, especially the win last night, where people might have been telling him before, "Oh, this is a 50-50 fight," but he dominated it from the start. It was easy work for him. As I say, he is honest. He's a little bit too honest sometimes, and I think with 2 rounds to go, Sims in the corner said, "Just go out and stop him now," like to make that statement where Porter didn't, and he's sitting in the corner just chatting away. He's not worried about gassing out. Using up all his breath in between rounds, and he's telling his corner, "This is easier than I thought it was going to be." Maybe he just forgets that the mics are there. We can hear all that stuff. So, but yeah, exciting times for Conor Benn, and hopefully, I think domestic fights have to be made anyway because they're easier to make these days. The fighters, I'm sure, will be up for it, even if they might have some reservations. There might be just that public pressure that now is being forced upon them, where they don't want to sort of be deemed to people to think that they've chickened out of a fight. So, welterweight division in the UK could really, really heat up next year.
You mentioned that you fancied Conor Benn to beat Josh Kelly. It feels like Conor Benn sort of continued in his rise, and Josh Kelly's probably leveled off a little bit. He was very much the sort of maybe the best of that crop, but hasn't necessarily, continued to improve. But you've said that you thought Conor Benn would win that a year ago. What is it that you see in him and in Josh Kelly that makes you think that?
Well, I think so. Josh Kelly, I see him box. I was there for the fight when he boxed on the undercard of the Joshua Ruiz one out in New York. And I can't remember if he got the win or a draw that night, but I remember thinking you've lost that fight, and he was very lucky. And talk about style over substance. I just there was lots of flamboyance to his boxing, but I was like, this stuff going to work when you start going through the levels, and a guy's going to see through it, and. You talk about you can be the very best at that, that style of fighting, like a Prince Nassim Hamid, and then you get to the highest level, and someone like Barrera just beats you with textbook boxing. And I thought the same might be with Kelly, and I feel like a Conor Benn who fancies it and punches from all different angles. As he comes out, there's no edging into a fight with him. He comes out with a sharp mind. And then he's applying the pressure on Kelly. I think it could, Kelly could eat him up a little bit inside. But Kelly's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot of talent. And I don't know what he's been doing in the gym. I'm not sure exactly when he boxed last. So, but I know he's had a few problems. He pulled out of a fight late notice. I think he had some weight issues. If he hasn't made weight properly, that definitely will affect his performances. From times when he will make the weight properly. Training in the Alen Booth setup with they've had a few different fighters come in and out of the gym. I think I haven't followed it diligently, but there was times when he would be in the gym with some of the smaller guys, because Booth had some bantamweights, and Ryan Burnett and Conlon and that, they'll be able to throw different sort of combinations than you can when you start going up through the divisions. So you have to find a happy medium, especially if you're fighting in the welterweight division. And the highlight reel where he's throwing 5, 10, 15 left hooks in a row against guys standing still. You can do that on the heavy bag, but you can't do that. You wouldn't be able to get away with that with someone like Conor Benn, because he's going to be trying to take an angle and punch back hard. And now that he can, he's starting to box behind the jab, and he's got that lovely little drop back, just the 2 inches to just keep dropping back after his fire, to keep changing the distance and let that guy walk onto it. Don't think Kelly punches hard enough to have that David Haye type style where it's, he's gearing up a big defensive movement that comes in for a big single shot, and he's losing his foot position underneath it. Welterweights, you're going to have to throw combinations. I think I've got to make Ben the favourite in that fight right now.
And of course, we can't overlook David Avanesian. So Josh Kelly may well come a cropper before, and this fight never ever happens. But if we're to assume that Kelly comes through that one, how do you see him and Ben playing out?
Well, I'll save the proper prediction till after that, because I think that is his big. What is he? 10-0 with 1 draw, I believe he is. And that David Avanesian at this stage is a mad risk, and he's pulled out. That fight's fallen through a couple of times. I know Neil Marsh, who Avanesian's manager over here, has had a lot to say about that. They're convinced that he beats Kelly. Obviously, they would be, but that is a real dangerous fight. So if Josh Kelly can win that fight, a proper hard Avanesian, Russian, skilled, got everything in the locker. If he can win that fight, then that for me will say that he's ready for someone like Connie. And it sounds crazy to say that, because for me, Josh Kelly was the most exciting of those GB boys that turned over at that point. Mercurial talent, got it all, got the feet and the flashy style, looks great. But like you say, as Conor Benn has gone like this, Josh Kelly seems to have just gone like this. And it's not through any fault of his own, as far as I can tell. He's had injuries. There was an illness before one of the Avanesian fights. Obviously, the Ray Robinson night didn't go his way. But I think that he's so talented. I feel like he's going to be one of those ones where when he really steps up, that's when he's going to produce his best. I feel that, because I remember, I think he boxed Carlos Molina, and it was on one of the Joshua cards in a stadium, one of the Cardiff fights, I think, as far as I can remember. And he had his hands down, he was doing all his stuff. And Molina caught him, and straight away, he was bang, straight back up into his normal, orthodox kind of GB guard. So I feel like what George said, there's a worry that all this flashy stuff, all this head movement, that, half an inch that you rely on to get yourself out of trouble, I feel like if he really needs to, and when he really needs to, he's going to be able to revert to something far safer, more textbook, and still do his job like that. I don't think it's either totally flashy or nothing. I think he's got a middle ground in there. He just hasn't had to produce it yet. I can't believe we're saying that at the moment, it seems that Ben is the favourite and that he's the more established and more, experienced guy. But he is, I think, 17-0? So as a pro, he's far more experienced now. But I absolutely love that fight. I think the Avanesian fight's going to tell us a lot about it. I mean, if it happens, I wouldn't be surprised if that fight doesn't happen for some reason or another. Because if you're looking at Conor Benn, Josh Kelly now being a big fight, a big fight, and there's not that many on the horizon, like, I don't know if it's the pandemic or something else, but when you really scan around, it's not like we can go, oh, I want to see that, I want to see that, I want to see that. So when you get one, you've got to clutch it and you've got to nurture it. And I think Eddie Hearn obviously knows that. It's his job. And putting Josh Kelly in with someone like David Avanesian now, when that is on the horizon, Big Ben, big bust up. I mean, who knows? They could probably make it pay-per-view knowing them, with enough of the build-up. Are they going to risk a fight like Avanesian? Is Adam Booth going to? Is Josh Kelly? I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't happen. And then we get Conor Benn next at some point. But if he wins that fight, depending on the style he does it, he could beat Conor Benn. I love the fight because I think it's a massive clash of styles, and it's almost like that, the hard worker, the underdog, the guy who's built himself from nothing against the really sort of golden boy, pedestal kid, looks great, style over substance. I'm not saying this is what it is, but that, when you look at it, the two, that's what it is. It's the perfect blend. And right now, I mean, I'd probably pick Josh Kelly. So I'll probably have to go against the odds, I reckon. I reckon Conor Benn after last night is probably going to have to be the favourite. But it's one of those absence makes the heart grow fonder a little bit with Josh Kelly. And I honestly feel like he's so talented. I think that he might have too much. But like George said, maybe gets caught in a storm. And after 1 round, 2 rounds, he's like, whoa, I haven't had this. Never had this. Never, ever experienced that before. As a pro, as an amateur, that whirlwind like Conor Benn, and maybe he just gets caught up in it and he can't get going. It's a great fight, but I worry about the Avanesian fight as well. I don't know though, Martin. Who would you pick?
I think at this moment in time, in what are we in November? Yeah, I always say you have to go with what you know, and what we know is that Conor Benn is improving and that Josh Kelly is. And I'm not just. I feel like every time I agree with George, everyone's just going to say I'm just agreeing with George because he should know. But based on what we know, I'd have to go with Conor Benn because I just can't be. And I don't love that flashy. Well, okay, let me explain this. I do like a flashy style and that cocky side of it, as long as you can back it up. But I feel when I've been watching Josh Kelly more recently, it's just frustrated me far more than it has entertained me. It's just felt like, I don't know, it just hasn't been. He just wants to do his own thing, regardless of what's in front of him, regardless of what he could do to finish a fight or to really put a statement on a result. He just continues to drop those hands and to stand in the corner and.
There's always a caveat as well, isn't there? It's always like, well, yeah, it's fine at this level, but what's he going to do when he boxes someone good? Like that's always what you think in the back of your mind. But I reckon he's got it in the locker. I mean, he's going to find out pretty swiftly if he hasn't, though. And I think January is when we will find out whether he can do it or not.
Yeah, I think. I just think when you see them guys that sort of have the flashy style and then even have the chat to back it up. And they haven't put a step wrong, and you're sort of along the lines of, well, can he do that when he steps up? But with Kelly, we see him in the Ray Robinson fight where it didn't work for him. It come unstuck, and it was a very simple formula to get past that, So that's where, I'm the same, Sometimes if you go to the park and you see dads playing football with their 6-year-old sons and they're nagging them and then, and then they're doing an over-the-top celebration and everyone else doing a football they are from it. It's like, well, it was kind of expected, mate, And it's the same when pros first start out. Yeah, sure, you can do the flashy stuff because the guy in front of you is there to survive. He's not punching back. It's when you start stepping up and you're in there with guys with winning records who are in there to win. So, I think this next fight for Kelly is an acid test. Like it's probably everyone around him wants to know how good he is and can he make that step up. And I worked with Adam Booth when I first turned pro, and I told him, look, I want to be in challenging fights, and he said, yeah. He said, otherwise you'll forget how to box. You'll forget what it's like to be in a fight. So he was always of the mindset, and I believed him when he said it that he wanted to push his fighters on because otherwise. It's detrimental to them. They won't improve unless they're, put in deep water from time to time. Of course, when a fighter does seem like he's come a cropper, then you might need to rein something in. But Adam Booth, he's not. He'd happily back his fighter. There's been times when fighters he's had have had a torrid time, and then they're back in a huge fight straight away after. So, but I think with Josh Kelly now, they'll want to know, like, let's not waste this talent. If you've got it and you're performing in the gym, let's get that transference into a real fight, so you can have that proof in the pudding. And then if he goes out and does a total job, and has a great performance in January, then the table's turned again, and everyone's saying, is this too early for Conor Benn? And that's kind of the mindset that you want to be putting on, your peers and the people around you. So I think I hope the fight comes off. There are question marks, of course, because it hasn't happened yet. But it'll be interesting. I think also now that, after Saturday night, Conor Benn's called out Josh Kelly. Josh Kelly's gone back at him already. The fight's got to happen now. It's just got to happen.
I got a question, George, because part of my wondering with the picking of that fight is I do think that Adam Booth's a big factor, and that he will come up with a game plan for someone like Conor Benn, and they'll drill something, and it will come off. You've obviously experienced that, and obviously in numerous fights, but in particular the James DeGale fight, where it was like, this is our game plan, this is what we're going to do, this is how we win the fight. Do you think it's a big factor, knowing what you do about Adam Booth, that he could come up with something and they just do that, and it's not just like, go on, Josh Kelly, show pony, go and do what you want to do, but actually it's like, this is how we win the fight and this is what we're going to do? Do you think that could be a factor?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, Dick, every trainer worth his money, worth his salt, will come up with a specific game plan, and it doesn't necessarily need to be extremely detailed. The best game plans are usually, right, you'll identify a handful of things, might even only be 2 or 3 things that the guy in front of you does really well that you need to watch out for. And they could be kind of general and vague. It could be like, well, you've got to look at the right hand or the left hook. And then how do you nullify or get rid of or just take away his left hook or his right hand? And on the flip side, what are you going to do? So what's going to be your 2 or 3 points of, points of advantage? Like, so is it your foot positioning? Which way you're going to turn? Are you going to move around to your left or move around to your right? Are you going to, keep it at a double distance, or are you going to try and sit on his chest a little bit? Are you literally going to tie up the lead hand each time he gets close and then work away with your right hand, and then as he pulls away, then you spring on him? So, I mean, what also is important to always factor in is the fighter's got to go out there and do it. The fighter's got to go out there and execute the game plan. And sometimes there's a little bit too much emphasis on the magical trainer who's come up with the game plan, when actually it's the fighter who's had to go out and perform it and make, the millisecond adjustments throughout the fight, to get the game plan off. I've had game plans with Adam Booth, where he took an awful lot of credit for the James DeGale game plan, and it was one that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with, because it was you're gonna marginally win each round, and that took me a long time to get over. Like, if he scores no shots and you land 1 shot, you win the round. I was like, it don't sit right with me. But I went to the gym and I spent months and months and months. It wasn't even a 12-week camp. It was, from the start of 2011, I think, until May. So 5 months drilling that game plan to get it off. And we did, And likewise, I've had coaches in my corner that are telling me I'm fighting Dennis Douglin and he's a southpaw and he's a 1.5 feet shorter than me, but he keeps hitting me with a check right hook because the corner's telling me throw out a double jab. It's like, I haven't thrown double jabs since I was 12 years old. Like, let's put a little bit more, a little bit more wisdom behind it. And then, after 3 or 4 rounds, I go, all right, well, I'm just going to do my own thing now and I'll stop him around later. So I think, getting back to the point, talk about myself all the time, Conor, you will have a game plan, for, of course, for each fighter, but it's not necessarily going to be that easy because he's not that obvious, Conor Benn, and he does start real quick. So getting into the flow of your fight from the get-go, to establish your own sort of timing and ring positioning and tempo that you want to work to, will be tough against someone like Conor Benn, because he's happy to start, go, and he'll be aggressive on the front foot, throwing power shots. I didn't throw a power shot for 2-3 rounds. I rarely won a first round. It was usually just a nothing round, because I'm feeling out the guy in front of me and you want to get your position in the rest of it. But Ben's not like that. And that would be quite daunting for an opponent to know that, right, we're straight in the mix here. And one mistake and I could get caught real early that's going to have an effect. Might not get stopped or nothing, but buzzed, knocked off balance, offset, could even get caught with a body shot that, that's going to hurt, that's going to have to start paying dividend for the guy in front of you in 3, 4, 5 rounds time, because he's depleting your energy. So it's interesting. It'll be real interesting. And I'm sure they've been working on a Conor Benn game plan already, maybe even with the mindset of not taking this next fight and going straight into a Benn fight. That wouldn't have happened if Benn didn't win last night, and now we're talking about it. But it might have been on the back of in the back of Kelly's team's mind. So they'll be ready. They'll definitely be ready. But a long answer to say, don't put too much faith in the old trainer's game plan. It's always up to the fighter to go out and do it there.
I mean, having talked about all this now, it feels criminal to have to wait 6-7 months for this fight. But as we say, in the meantime, we will hopefully have Kelly Avanesian, which in itself will deserve and merit a long discussion. And It should be a thrilling fight. We must move on to briefly talk about two heavyweight fights on Saturday night. First of all, Alen Babic took 3 rounds to get rid of Tom Little. And then, in fact, let's group these together. And then Fabio Wardley. Actually, let's not. Let's start with Babic. Tom Little did seem to come in shape, but again, we didn't learn anything, did we? Really?
Yeah. Let's start off by maybe being cruel, but telling it as it is, right? Tom Little came in shape, which just shows you how out of shape he must normally be. And I think they said he'd lost his last 4 by a stoppage. It wasn't chief support, but it was like co-chief support. I know this was originally a heavyweight pay-per-view, so they would have wanted a couple of heavyweights on the card. But Babic, everyone was excited at home, but I don't know. I want to pretend to be a boxing purist, and I'm not quite. But I struggle to enjoy that, where he just at times bum rushed Tom Little, and then in the end, it looked like Little had thought that one probably landed well enough for me to not need to get up. Johnny Nelson sort of tried to jump on it and say there's no way that Little got sprawled the way that he made out he did. And Adam Booth answered the question very well about, how far can Babic go? And his answer was something along the lines of, we just don't know because we haven't seen nothing, because he hasn't boxed anyone. And he hasn't actually showed us anything that would make you think that he can compete at any higher level. I didn't really enjoy it, to be honest. I found it a little bit uncomfortable. And you got Conor Benn now main event, and we've got Chris Congo on Skype watching it. Why isn't Chris Congo on the undercard? And then we've got direct comparisons to the main event to really home and enjoy it, rather than a mismatch. You can put them fights on if you really want, but they're like the first fight on the card, bottom feeder, a white collar fighter against a journeyman, and just watch someone get sort of tanked for a couple of rounds. But I thought boxing was past that now. We that's 15, 20 years ago. We should have moved on past that. And that wouldn't happen in any other division apart from the heavyweight division. So a genuine concern of mine is how far are we all, as the fans, going to allow this to sort of happen, and therefore the TV networks and the promoters to put on these heavyweight fights that are sort of robbing other prospects of a slot on the card where we could watch some real quality boxing, because the heavyweight division doesn't have a depth of talent. Yeah, it's interesting at the highest level, but you can't. I'm not a fan of this sub-tier heavyweights that are just in fights because maybe they're cheap to put on and they're heavyweights. That's not good enough. I want to see some prospects. I wish I should have sat down and wrote down 2,000 prospects that I'd rather have seen on the card instead. But seeing Chris Congo's face on there, who is an excellent, diligent pro, who no one would have heard of outside of the boxing community, might never get his chance to break, but a dedicated pro who deserves a bit of profile. So someone like that would have been much better for me to have seen, supporting a Sky boxing card, on a Saturday night fight night.
But I reckon you've absolutely nailed it there, because I think what we're seeing here is, and Eddie Hearn's spoken about this openly. I heard him on a podcast the other day, and the fact is his market, the hardcore fans, is a tiny little slither of his customer base and Sky's customer base. And George and us, we're part of that. And we would see that and be like, what is it? Like, what is this? Why do we want to see this little bloke hammering away at a slightly bigger bloke for as long as he can stand up for? But the fact is, the casual market, the 95% other, which represents far more income than the hardcore, love it. Absolutely lap it up. And there you just have to look at Twitter throughout the week. The only person anyone's talking about is Alen Babic, really. not even people talking about Fabio Wardley. It's all people love Alen Babic. And a bit like Dave, it's the same with Dave Alen. That slight effect where he wasn't, his profile, his record and his talent and his wins did not reflect the profile and the love and adulation he got from people. But it's just something about it. And the casual fans absolutely love Alen Babic. And because of that, and I can only assume, I haven't seen his contract, but I can only assume he is cheap because they're wheeling him out constantly. We already hear from everyone, he doesn't train, he just spar, he just wants to fight. And like, you can't have a go at Alen Babic. He's turning up and running after people and winging at them for as long as it lasts. I think we all know that he'll come unstuck at some point. As soon as someone doesn't, can make it through a few rounds and start hitting him back because he seems to tire. But people love seeing that. And like when you said there about Chris Congo, no one really knows who he is. Exactly. That's what Eddie Hearn's thinking. That's what Sky are thinking. It's like, okay, yeah, we could put a high quality young British fighter on here in a meaningful fight, and we can make comparisons with Conor Benn, or we could sling Alen Babic against someone, and he's going to knock him out, and it's going to be a little clip on Twitter for the next week until he fights another guy. And that's just what we're going to put up with. And you're right to say, what is the long-term ramifications of that for boxing? Because for me, that ain't good, especially at the moment when there's not that many cards. People aren't getting paid very much. Where do we go? Where do we go? And yeah, I mean, what do you like? Personally, I don't like. And I think the thing is with Tom Little, he turned up in shape and light. I reckon he would have had a better chance if he was heavy, and if he'd stood there, managed to absorb a few more, and maybe got a couple off, because he actually started pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to dwell on it, but I just feel like this is what we've got. This is what we've got to put up with now, and this is what Sky Cards are going to be. This is what box cards are going to be like, because they need to appeal to the wider audience, and they they always have. People love heavyweights and they love knockouts, no matter how crude it might be.
But there were only 5 fights on Saturday night, so there's no longer a 5-fight limit on cards as far as I'm aware. So there's no reason why you can't have both. You don't have to have. You can, if Alen Babic was on second or third of 6 or 7 fights, people are still going to watch. And I think Conor Benn has enough of a pool to then for people to either stick with it or to come back to it and watch the main event. And then if you want to put someone like Chris Congo on, as we said, as chief support, he's not that expensive, surely, that you can't do it all.
I think he's expensive enough that he can't do it at the moment. I think that's as simple as that. And I think that's why we had a lot of women's boxing as well, because clearly cheaper than their equivalent men. And yeah, I feel like it's what we're going to get a lot. And it worked, and it's almost like it hit the jackpot with Dave Allen. And like there was that big joke about there's the Dave Allen button when you got a pay-per-view struggling, or someone put get Dave Allen on it because that's going to put so many buys on it. It's kind of like that with Alen Babic, and managed by Dillian White. The Fabio Wardley boxed Richard Lartey, who, let's not forget, was a headline fight against Daniel Dubois in non-pandemic times. I mean, there was no one there. It looked like there was a pandemic on, but that was a headliner. So that's the chief support here. So like, it all gets recycled. They're all at it. And as long as people are still watching, and they're watching it more so than anything else, it's going to keep happening. And I bet you now people are talking about, we're talking about Alen Babic. But all over Twitter, once they finish talking about Conor Benn, that's what they're talking about. That's what the hardcore and the big wide market likes. And it's like, yeah, you end up sounding like a fan who moans about the band getting popular. And if that's what it's like. It's like, yeah, well, I want to actually see. I want to see this. I want to see this guy who won the ABAs twice, and he's done this, and he's boxed him, and he's done it. And look at his talent. Look at how he's progressing, rather than Babic battering someone. Like, I'd rather watch that. But I think we're in the minority here.
I think clickbait is not a good enough excuse for people, and if they didn't put on that fight, then we wouldn't be talking about it. So that's not an excuse. You know what I mean? If they'd put a welterweight prospect on, and he'd looked good in a good fight, and stopped someone in the 4th round, then maybe people would be talking about him, and that would be that. But for years now, we've had, I mean, since Andy Joshua won the Olympics, we've had heavyweights boxing rammed down the British boxing's throat, and thank God for Anthony Joshua that he's got through every challenge put in front of him and went on to become a world champion. In the meantime, Tyson Fury's come back from drug scandals and everything else that he went through, and has now found popularity. And he's now on top of the division after such a great win against Deontay Wilder. But now there's just like a clamber to try and create an industry at the heavyweight division, which there hasn't been. The Americans are still not fussed about it. They're building slowly. It's the UK and even Europe now. You've got Sauerland bringing over heavyweights. But, Hrgovic, Babic versus Hrgovic seems absurd to me. Like, Hrgovic is a genuine heavyweight, a genuine contender. Maybe slightly slowly in terms of his progression, but that usually of the Sauerland way of doing things. They don't rush things, and there will have to wait for a time in the market to sort of elevate him to fight for one of the world titles. But Babic isn't even a little guy who's got a bit of skill and can hold his own. He was raw, and is that really where the sport's going? Like, someone who would just with no skill but happy to have a tear up, bash up someone who's in there to get beat. And again, you can put that on way down the card. Put that on, that's the first fight of the night, if that's what you want. And you say, why is it limited to 5 fights? Why couldn't there have been 1 or 2 more meaningful fights in there that would have cropped up? As soon as the heavyweight pay-per-view's gone, right, you need a reshuffle, you spend some money, we need to get 2 more meaningful domestic clashes, just where we can see a bit of skill on show. But you wouldn't get this in any other sport. I think that's where I struggle with. That's where it gets my goat. You don't get this in football. People pay top dollar because they want to see the very best. They want to see the Premier League. They want to see La Liga. They don't. You don't want to see mismatches in football, and you're not really interested in Sunday leagues. Not televised. Like, maybe a bit harsh to call Babic Sunday League, but there was elements of that fight that was raw novice. It looked like a sparring session that I'd see down in the white collar gyms. It was bizarre.
I think clearly as soon as White Povetkin was, that was basically the fight. They struck gold to get that for a second time. Let's be honest, that wasn't part of the plan. Suddenly they've got a rematch.
It's worth mentioning that Babic and Wardley are both managed by Dillian Whyte, so I can only assume that they're on the card because it's his card and he's the main event, and that's why that happened as well. And
both will be on the January 30th card as well. Eddie hadn't said that, but clearly as soon as White Povetkin was off, they thought, oh, we've lost the only fight people were interested in. But as George said, they didn't restructure it or reshuffle it or create a better card. They just basically put the remnants out, banked on Conor Benn, and then had a bit of fun with Babic. Briefly on Fabio Wardley, put out Richard Lartey in the second round. Strange finish. He did catch him with the left hook, but the right hook definitely caught the gloves, and then Lartey was down and needed oxygen. Between his ring walk and his recovery, that was about twice as long as the fight lasted. A bit strange, really, for a man who went, well, Gorman wasn't in shape, really, but Dubois took 4 rounds.
My initial thought was that he swallowed it. He's taken a dive here. I haven't been hit by Fabio Wardley, so I don't know what it's like, but the second that right hand didn't land, it landed full on the glove. He got caught with a jab that buzzed him beforehand, so the brain is a delicate thing, so maybe that affected him, and then anything that touched him then would send him. But the way he went down, I was just a little bit, I don't know, maybe he thought, I don't fancy this. Or maybe Fabio Wardley's that heavy-handed that he can land one right hand directly on the glove and put people to sleep and needing oxygen. Maybe it's a bit like, remember when Deontay Wilder knocked out Malik Scott, everyone said he'd taken a dive, and then you're like, well, maybe actually he just caught him. But it was bizarre, and it wasn't, I don't know, they're going on about this spectacular one-punch knockout and stuff, and I'm a little bit like, it was strange, put it that way, it was strange.
I tell you, one way to sort of thin out the pack of white collar heavyweights is just to put them all in together. Just put Wardley and Babic in, And I don't know what happened, but one of them will be probably knocked out and then never hear of them again.
Yeah, Martin, but never forget heavyweights live forever. So they can fight each other, they can lose, but they ain't going anywhere. We'll still see it again. And unless we get some other talent being shown in other divisions, that's what we're going to get. So, I'm fingers crossed. I'm more than a boxing purist. I'm just a casual boxing fan, I promise you. And I want to see some talent. Like I want to see something outside, someone being properly matured and developed outside of the heavyweight division. And you look at, the GB team now that have just had their Olympics postponed for a year. What have they got to look forward to? Because you want to win an Olympic medal, then you want to turn professional, and you're like, well, where do I fit in the current setup? Like, who would I go with now? Who's going to develop my career and get me to the top level and make me a household name? Because the previous, the Rio 16, lads that came through. You've got Lawrence Okoli now is going to fight for a world title next month. But other than that, I can't think of Buatsi. So yeah, we've got Buatsi who. He headlined his show the other week, which was kind of put together last minute on a Sunday. Again, you felt like, what's going on here? Like, I feel like, I don't know who's to blame, but I feel like he hasn't been developed quite as well as what he could have been. And then I suppose it's Kelly as well, isn't it? Josh Kelly came out of that generation of fighters. So with this next current crop, we're going to have to work really hard to get some profile. So
I'll tell you one guy who's licking his lips will be Fraser Clark, because he's a big, horrible heavyweight. And he even tweeted that he'd eat these guys for breakfast. So he's in a decent spot because he's maybe the best plus 91 in the world as an amateur. He's right up there. He's going to be serious. He's not coming into it young. He's going to be a serious problem at that weight because he's good. And he's going to take advantage of this thing where it's like, just stick some heavyweights on. And he's ready. He's good to go. WSB, all of that. If he gets through the Olympics, he's right in there. But for the rest of them, you're thinking, wow, this is a tough path, a tough old road. But I guess it's always been thus. But the one thing about Wardley and Babic, they ain't going to fight because they're both managed by Dylan White, so he ain't going to do that, which is a shame.
True. It's just as well have the perfect antidote to what we've just talked about. Joe Joyce, Daniel Dubois. This coming Saturday, we will preview that in part 2. So it was postponed in April, postponed in July, and postponed in October. But finally, towards the end of November, we have a heavyweight fight with proper ramifications. Daniel Dubois against Joe Joyce, the young knockout artist against, limited professional experience, possibly, but obviously a lot of amateur experience in Joe Joyce. Really an intriguing one. I think when this fight was first made, the odds were pretty much even. Daniel Dubois now very much odds on. George, this is a real proper fight, right?
Yeah, no, this is heavyweight boxing that I can get excited about, definitely. I mean, Daniel Dubois, you got to say, probably the best. He's still a prospect. I still class him as a prospect. He's early 20s, 20, 22, 23, 24 years old. Probably best prospect in world boxing at heavyweight division. Joyce, just because of his age, you can say that he's not necessarily a prospect, but he is. He's still a prospect because he's yet to face for a world title. But he's got wins over Brian Jennings and Stavern. So he's been in there with guys who have been in there with the best, and he stopped Stavern. I know Stavern was, he'd been beat by Wilder then. He wasn't quite the same fighter. But it's, when this fight was first made, I thought I'm going to go with Dubois. I think Dubois is going to be fresher, even though, necessarily in the pro ranks, there's not a lot between them. But obviously with the age and, the accumulation of the amateur bouts that Joyce has had, it's going to go with Dubois. But it is a little bit tougher to pick sometimes. You think Joyce he was not the sort of fighter you want to be fighting in the heavyweight division. He's strong. I think he can dig a bit, and he's just got a fantastic engine, and he's on you. Like, he's on you to the almost in a sort of ignorant way, like without being too, not to say he's an ignorant person, but his style is ignorant. He's on, like, he's happy to walk through punches at times to impose his physicality upon another opponent. And Dubois doesn't have the same sort of names. He's got a win over Johnson. Kevin Johnson's been there with everyone, but a prolific, a loser at that point. But what he does have, I think, is to his advantage is the Gorman win, where they were both prospects, both unbeaten. It was billed as not quite the 50-50, but a lot of people thought Gorman was going to be too clever for him, beat him. He's got like all these rounds under his belt from, boxing, sparring together on GB, and he was going to have the hidden code to beat Gorman, to beat Dubois. But Dubois blast him out there, and for that might put him in a real positive mind frame. Real interesting fight. Real interesting fight. It's not quite as black and white as I think, as Dubois got to knock him out to beat him, and Joyce has got to swarm him and win the rounds and break him down. Even though it's very difficult to try and articulate it away from there, but I think I'm still going to go with Dubois. I think Dubois beats Joyce, but this could be an outstanding fight to watch. I'm really looking forward to it, and it's free. It's a BT subscription, but fair play to the fighters if they're willing to take a pay cut to make this fight happen, and fair play to Frank Warren, who must be losing an awful lot of money to put this fight on, with no gate and no pay-per-view revenue to come in. Still only a British title fight, but huge fight, heavyweight division, a fantastic fight for the fans.
I was one of those people who I did think Nathan Gorman would give Daniel Dubois a lot of problems and maybe beat him. And I think I'm going to put this in now before I'm accused of copying anyone, but I would back. I'm leaning towards Joe Joyce for this one, because for me, Dick, a lot of what happens on Saturday night is about Daniel Dubois. Having just said that, I think that Joyce wins. And can he show something he's not had to show before? Now, if he can, then he's probably as good as we've all been saying, if not better. But again, as I say, on what I've seen so far, I don't know. So, go on.
I think the pick, if you're picking Joe Joyce, you're picking on what we know already. And if you pick Daniel Dubois, you're picking on stuff that we don't know yet, but what might happen. So we know that Joe Joyce is relentless. I remember, it was hilarious, but Richard Schaefer, when Joe Joyce first turned over and he was with David Hayes as a presser with the guys that he signed, and Richard said that Joe Joyce is like the heavyweight Manny Pacquiao, which is hilarious. But you know what he's getting at? He throws a lot of punches. Right? He's not Filipino, and he's not southpaw, but throws a lot of punches. He's relentless. He's strong. He's there. But the problem is, he's there. He's in front of you. So Daniel, but he's been there. He's been there with Stavern. Not a great Stavern. He's been there with Bryant Jennings. Good win. So he's done these things. He knocked out Joe Hanks in America on the Wilder Fury, the first one. So he's been there. So we know what he's about. But with Daniel Dubois, the jury's still out at this level, maybe. But is it? I was watching a little round table thing they did, and it was brilliant. And I love the new Dubois, by the way, because he was very quiet, shy, couldn't get a line out of it. As a journalist, he was borderline nightmare. But now he's far more open, he's far more lucid. And Joe Joyce and his manager were like, you haven't had a serious fight. You needed to have a middle fight. And Dubois didn't miss a step when you're the middle fight. And it was just brilliant. It's like, actually, yeah, maybe he is. Maybe all along we'll look back on it and be like, Joe Joyce was just a middle fight. And it's not this big, even thing that we're seeing. Because if Dubois is as good as we think he might be, this shouldn't be a problem for him. But what happens if after 4 or 5 rounds, he's tried to empty the tank to get rid of him, and he's getting hit back, and he's getting hit in the body, and he's got big bloke leaning all over him for ages. How does he react to that? How does he respond? And I think if you're picking against Dubois, it's because you feel like we've seen enough of Joyce to know that he can do this. But if you're picking against Joyce, it's because you hope that Dubois that's not a problem for him, or that his power is big enough to get rid of an established guy like Joyce with that sort of style. My feeling is that Joyce is a little bit too hittable, and he's going to be eating jabs a lot. And it's a very, very good jab he's got. I don't think he's got concussive knockout one-punch power, Dubois, but I think it's that cumulative thing. He goes to the body well, and I just think he's too hittable. Joe Joyce is too hittable, and he's going to soak up punishment and end up getting stopped. But this is a hunch. It's a great fight. And yeah, like George said, endless credit to everyone involved that it's on free, or subscription TV. It's absolutely insane in this day and age that we get to say that, and it's great. And I hope that people tune in, and I hope it gets the viewing figures that it deserves. And I mean, I think if Dubois wins, it's a massive, it's a huge statement. And then he goes on, and they're talking about getting a belt or a world title shot next fight. Might be slightly too early, but he's 23. He's 23. Like, he's 10 years away from his peak as a heavyweight. It's insane. So if he wins this fight, sky's the limit.
No, I
mean,
go on, man.
No, crack on.
Yeah, just jump from your analysis deck. So I agree with the majority of it. What I think Dubois does have, though, is that one punch knockout. I think he has that sort of power, and I don't think that's going to be what he's going to need to rely on for Joyce. Because you're right, Joyce does. He leaves himself exposed. He's very hittable, and especially to the body. And I feel like a Dubois game plan will be, working behind the jab. He's much more lighter and agile on his feet now. Since when he first turned pro, where he just looked huge, and he was like, he sort of had to almost gallop into range, and it almost telegraphed a lot of his shots. Now he's a lot more slicker, a lot more smoother, and even if Joyce is trying to back him up onto the ropes, he can lean on the ropes and just throw them hook arm, bent arm shots to the body. And I think they're going to have a real effect on Joyce. I remember seeing Joyce in a fight. I can't remember which fight it was, but it was in someone who we'd heard of. It might have been Stavern, might have been Jennings. And I thought he got caught with a body shot. And I could tell that it hurt, but he had to just sort of bite down the gum shield, punch his way through it. And he got through that incident. And I just remember thinking, as you start going through the levels, I know that not even the top end heavyweights ain't necessarily that experienced, and they might not necessarily see these things, but there will be heavyweights out there that will catch you with that body shot, that whippy sort of ones that slices you across the midsection and almost cut you in two. And you need to somehow learn how to carry on with your style of fighting where you are able to apply that pressure constantly, but without leaving so many openings to get hit back. Because in amateur boxing, even in the world boxing, WBS, you can maybe just overawed the guy in front of you by just, with tenacity and work rate. But over 12 rounds with the 10 ounce fight gloves, it's not going to be so easy. And I think Dubois, we'll see a much more clinical, but a more smoother, experienced, clever Dubois. It's going to be a fascinating fight. It's not going to be a be-all conclusion, but I think his one punch power, I think he's probably one of the hardest punches in the division. I think that's probably going to be the factor that might even cross Joyce's mind, where I can't carry on walking into range and giving away free shots, or I do and roll the dice and possibly go out on my sword, hoping to land a big shot himself. But fascinating, really, really exciting fight. Really, really exciting fight.
But surely Joe Joyce is not daft, right? He knows that Daniel Dubois can hit as hard as he can. So, and also look at his amateur pedigree, look at his professional record, look at the trainers he's worked with as a professional. So why does he get hit so easily? Because he must know it. If everyone else says it, he must know it. So is it because he knows he can take the shots? And if it is, then either if he knows he's not going to be able to take those same shots against Daniel Dubois, will he not have some way to avoid it? I know that's easier said than done, but he's going to have a plan, right?
Well, I mean, he's going to have a plan, but it's almost one of them where you are what you are. Like that's him. And you mentioned his amateur experience and stuff. Cool. Over 3 rounds, big gloves, head guards, which is what he was at the time. Sweet. As a professional, hasn't been hit like that. I know what you're saying. Like, it's not like he's stupid and he's like, oh, I'm just going to go into this fight and I'm not gonna have to get hit. He knows what he's doing, but yeah, I think he backs himself. He's got a decent chin, but I think Dubois is clever in traps. I'm saying he's hittable. I'm not saying he's just open for endless punishment, but I just feel like I think he's a talent, Dubois, and he'll set traps and he'll land big ones, because it's almost one of them where just hammering away at him is not going to work either. It's going to have to be clever, but I think he is real clever. I think he's a bit of a different breed, Daniel Dubois. And we mentioned Tony Sims and Conor Benn. I think the Bowers brothers down at the Peacock done an exceptional job with him, because he had a long, extensive junior amateur career. He was bouncing around gyms, but actually he had 6 or 7 senior bouts as an amateur. So nothing. On GB for a bit, so sparred some of the guys, but yeah. And I feel that he's clever enough to set traps. And Joyce, yeah, he's not going to stand there and just withstand punishment, but I feel like you revert to type at one point, and his type, he's like a big bear, isn't he? He walks forward and he slingshots and he backs his own chin. In a fight like this, I don't think he can.
No, fair enough. And you're right. You meant if Daniel, and again, it's one of those fights, I think, in a week's time, maybe almost whatever the result, you can kind of say, oh yeah, that was coming. And certainly if Daniel Dubois does a job on him, then I think as I said, he probably will be as good, if not better, than we thought. Let me just run through the odds. Daniel Dubois is now 9-2 on, actually, with Betfair. Joyce 3-1.
3-1?
George,
Wow.
3-1.
That's big. That's a big price for a fight like this. Even though I back Dubois, I think that's a bit off.
It certainly moved quite a lot. In terms of any specifics, George, in terms of how you see the fight going?
Yeah. So, what's the fight? Have you got any other odds for the fight?
All the odds
not to go 12 rounds. Dubois to get off the floor and win. I don't think that will happen, to be honest. But I just want to. Sometimes the odds just tempt you, don't they? I mean, I've sat here and convinced myself, and hopefully everyone else that Dubois is going to win. But then you hear 3-1 for Joyce, you're like, what do the bookies know that we don't, eh? But
it's almost one of them where the price is so good, even if you fancy Dubois, it's like maybe you should have a bit of that. If it's a 50-50 fight, or at least if you feel like it is, 3-1 is very tempting. Yeah.
I think you could have like Dubois down on the cards. I'm not even sure if this is a bet, but down on the cards, but to win by stoppage. I don't know. You just.
So I quite like the Dubois decision, because everyone thinks that it's Dubois early, or if someone's getting stopped, it's Joyce, and then if it goes a distance, Joyce wins. I could see Dubois boxing his way through this, because I think he's a lot more cultured and schooled than people think. And Joyce, if Joyce is that super tough, which he is, I quite like a Dubois decision. What price? What are we talking for that?
9-2.
Probably not great. How many?
9-2.
9-2. Dec, I'd back you on that bet as well, because it might not be the finishing shot, but it might be a big power shot that lands on Joyce, and then Joyce just decides, right, well, I'm not going to walk into them shots because that's not going to work for me. I'm going to try and box a bit longer. And Joyce Dubois lands a few heavy shots throughout the round that allows him to pick up the round each round and rack up the points. And he's happy to see out a 12-round victory. Don't know, maybe.
What I don't see is Joe Joyce winning on points. I don't see him outboxing Dubois and winning 7 rounds. Basically, I can't see that. Maybe I'm wrong, but. And also with these massive fights like this, there's so much riding on it. Sometimes it can just be far cagier than people imagine. And although we've been told it's this big firework, it's going to be over in 3, it's Hagler Hearns heavyweight. Maybe it doesn't turn out like that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a distance job. 2 tough guys and with a lot riding on it.
Joyce has worked with a few different trainers throughout his short pro career. Adam Booth, Salas. Golovkin's former Abel Sanchez, but he's back with Salas, who you would think, an intricate Cuban trainer who works with bantamweights and below and gets them to do extraordinary things. What's he doing with Joyce, who you can't get him to pivot and step and do all these intricate little boxing moves, but Joyce must think that's the way that's the way forward for him here. I can't see Salas changing his philosophy on boxing, his coaching, as in just just get in amongst him and just let your hands go. There'll be some slick little subtleties and some clever moves that I'm sure he'll be drilling throughout camp. And maybe it's right, well, we'll just let you go, but as soon as you get into this range, I want you to take make this move or adjust your feet like this, throw this specific shot. Back to game plans, Deck. Maybe he's got something that can do, and let him find a home for some big shots on Dubois, and also nullify Dubois' big power shots.
What do you make of the fact that he's had 3 trainers, as you mentioned, and gone back to his first one now? I mean, Joyce seems to love the son. I think that is a genuine factor in him training across in America, although I don't know if he's been able to do that for this fight. He did at the start of the year, but I'm not sure he's been able to get over. What do you make of the fact that he's had 3 trainers in such a short space of time?
I think he has done his camp in London. I think he has. I think I'm not sure whereabouts in London, but I know Steve Broughton, who used to work with Shane McGuigan, also used to work with David Hay, and then probably worked with Joyce while he was assigned to Hay's promotional company with Salas. I think he's been involved, and I think they've been in London. But yeah, hopping coach to coach. I remember asking Joyce about this once and said, how comes? And he's like, well, I went with Booth because he'd teach me how to do one punch, wanted me a one punch knockout artist. And then he went to Salas because Salas was going to teach him how to do all these intricate boxing moves. And then I'm not sure what he said he got from Abel Sanchez, but he's probably going about it wrong, but feels I'm going to go with these coaches to just add a bit more to my game. This guy is this specific coach, and he's going to teach me this specific skill, which I can then just add to my artillery. I can now I can box, on the back foot. Now I can throw one punch power shots. Now I can do this. Now I can do that. But maybe also these coaches, they have their philosophy of training, and it might not gel with Joyce's style or his temperament or his approach to training. If you're trying to get a fighter to do a specific stance or a specific punch, and they don't want to do it consciously or unconsciously, usually that's when you have to part ways and find someone who's more in line with your style. And Salas, I would say, is the bottom of that list of trainers he's been with in terms of how his philosophy of training, working with Jorge Linares and fighters like that, to John Joe Joyce. It's a bit bizarre, but maybe they just got great camaraderie and a good relationship. They can be honest with each other, and he got trust. Trusted Salas to give him the right instruction at the right time. And he's going to need that in this big fight, It's always good to have someone to just bounce off the ideas as such, throughout the fight. Is this going right? Am I doing this right? What do you think of this? And sometimes they're not even spoken words. They're just body language, and that the fight's going your way. Or if something's not working, then you need trust in the person in the corner to give you the right instruction of how to either prevent that bad thing from happening, or even better yet, to what you need to do next to solve that problem. Dubois have been with Dubois since his whole pro career, I think, even though he moved around amateur clubs. I've seen clips of them two in the gym together, and there's an element to their relationship which does still seem like amateur coach with amateur fighter, where it's more than just a pro coach who's there for purely work. It's like he's there for him. He wants to take care of him. He wants to, advise him properly throughout his, the whole process. And that probably leads to a deeper bond, a closer connection, which I assume is a great thing for Dubois.
Just finally, Joe Joyce cannot lose this fight, or can't afford to lose this fight, can he? He's 35. very difficult to see where he goes after that, if that was to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, he can't lose this fight if he has aspirations, which he does, of world titles and stuff like that. But, I mean, he can lose it and still, if Dubois is this talent and this star and the next heavyweight world champion and a dominant force for the next 10 years, Joyce can afford to lose this fight. There's no shame in it. But right now, then it's a tough road back to the top. But there's fights there for him. And like we said already, people love heavyweights. They'll get him fights. They'll get him opponents. There's people like Derek Chisora out there. There's all sorts of fights like that he can still go. But in terms of world heavyweight aspirations for him, I feel like this is make or break. Not so much for Daniel Dubois. He can come back. And in reference to, we spoke about earlier, George's fight with DeGale, it's the same thing where it didn't matter. The loser wasn't finished, clearly. But this one, if Joe Joyce loses this one, it's a tough road back, and he hasn't got time on his side when it comes to it, because we're talking about a era of heavyweights now where they're really good. Like Tyson Fury is really, really good. We might get belts sharded off here and there, but it's hard to see where he goes if he loses this one. Dubois, not so much. He can rebuild. He can take as long as he needs to, but it's a tough old road back for Joyce. And I think he'll know that. And that might give him something extra as well.
Definitely one very much to look forward to this coming weekend. And in part 3, I feel like we're kind of flip-flopping back to novelty heavyweight boxing, really, with Mike Tyson against Roy Jones Jr., which will follow Dubois Joyce on BT Sport on Box Office. But we will have a quick look at that in part 3. As we mentioned, Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr. in the middle of Saturday night, middle of Sunday morning, on BT Sport pay-per-view, which presumably is helping to offset the loss from Dubois Joyce being on regular BT subscription. We're not going to get into the ins and outs and the intricacies of two old men, essentially, 105 years old between them. But let's talk about, is this something that we just accept is basically sums up 2020, whether it's YouTubers or whether it's former legends or legends and former greats coming back? Is it just something we accept and hope that nobody gets hurt, or should we really look forward to it a little bit? I'll put that to the floor.
You can fire away, George. Go on.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because for me, part of me is looking forward to it. I'd pay for it, but maybe not as a boxing fan as such, just as the exhibition there is the novelty act. But is that just because it's Tyson and Jones? I'm not sure. And for me, boxing, if it's boxing, then you want to see a knockout, but I don't want to see either one of these men get knocked out, because then it becomes real again and it becomes boxing. So you don't really want them to just dance about and showboat and mess about. You assume they're going in to have a fight, even though it's an exhibition. But you don't want to see either one of them get hurt, especially Roy Jones, who was a career middleweight, super middleweight, went up to heavyweight, sure, and beat Ruiz, but then came back down and had some devastating knockouts throughout his career. And it looked like his punch resistance was completely gone. Like he was a fighter who, if there's ever fighters there you implore them to stop, he would have been one, because his punch resistance had totally gone. Seeing Danny Williams fight, who obviously beat Mike Tyson, see him fight recently out in Russia, and his punch resistance is completely gone. And it's like, then it's not a fight anymore. I make Tyson the favourite. He's naturally the bigger man. And even though he's been much more inactive, I think he's going to be much more fresher for that reason. And the concerns are over Roy Jones's chin, and no one wants to see Roy Jones get knocked out by Mike Tyson. It was funny when Mike Tyson knocks out Alen in Hangover, and I was hoping that was the last time I was going to see Tyson. He still got it, but this, as much as I'd like to watch it, it doesn't necessarily mean I want to see much more of it. I think it's just because it's Mike Tyson, to be honest. He's a charismatic guy, I think, now, especially now. So having him on the screens is cool, and but it's kind of like, is this a no-win situation for the boxing fan to be watching? And are you going to be sitting on the edge of your seat hoping that it's just entertainment? And if it is at the end and there's no real substance to it, you're like, well, was that a bit pointless? The scariest thing would be, does this now try and open the door for some more, whatnot? But if it is some sort of Legends League and it is a way for ex-fighters to do something that's relatively safe somehow, I'm all for it. I'd much rather that than have clickbait that's two YouTubers fighting each other, or pretend that two white-collar fighters in the heavyweight division are real prospects. So I still pick Mike Tyson to beat every heavyweight on the card from the weekend. And that's without... I haven't even seen the 5-second clip of him on the pads. But that be that. So, not sure. I've got to say I want to watch it, but I'm not exactly sure why. And I hope I don't live to regret that, if that makes sense.
I mean, it is technically an exhibition over 8 rounds. The WBC have obviously created a belt for the occasion, and they also have 3 former fighters who will score each round. And I think they will tell the public that it scores after each round. So in theory, there can be a winner and there can be a loser. But both men, Dick, have said it will not be an exhibition in terms of how they approach it. I mean, what if you visualize it in your mind when the bell rings and they come out? What do you see?
I don't really know, because I don't even know. Like, obviously Tyson's not a massive, like, tall heavyweight, and Roy Jones obviously got sort of bigger and wider over the years. But I can't really even picture it. It does not. I'm in a different camp to George. It does nothing for me. Got no interest in watching it, because they've obviously spoken about, I want to win the fight, because they're not going to go, it's an exhibition, so make a few quid and we're just going to sort of pop a few jabs and have a little spar. They're not going to say that. I can't work out what it is they're trying to achieve, but I mean, if it's got them both fit and in shape and stuff, it's a bit like in the 40s when Gus Waldorf fought a bear in an officially sanctioned bout. And it's like, well, I don't want to see a bear maul a human, and I don't want to see a human beat up a helpless bear. Like, I don't want to see either of these things happen. So I'm like, I don't really want to see. I don't get I don't get it. And it's on pay-per-view. I'm going to be really interested to see who buys it and who stays up, because again, it's almost like Mike Tyson sort of lives. The pair of them are legends in the sport, but a lot of the older boxing fans who obviously absorbed all of that in the 90s and whatever, and actually had that experience with the two of them, are maybe gonna go, no, I don't want to see this. And then the younger guys were like, well, they're just 2 old guys. What about Logan Paul? Like, they don't really. I don't know who the market is. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how it's going to go. I really hope neither of them get hurt. That will be so sad. My only hope is that they've had a chat and that they've sorted this one out between themselves, and they're both going to get paid, which is sweet. And like I always say, I'd never like to have a go at someone for trying to make a few quid. So yeah, I can't even picture it. I'm definitely not staying up. There's no way I'm spending money on this pay-per-view.
I think that's pretty definitive. If you do, there are odds.
Have they gone up? What are the odds?
Mike Tyson is 9-4 on. Roy Jones Jr. 15-8, and the draw, unsurprisingly, much shorter than normal at 10-1.
What's the draw? I'll tell you. I'll have a bit on the draw. I'll have a little bit on the draw. No.
How many rounds is it?
8.
8
rounds. 8 rounds, yeah. So they're not messing about.
No.
Is it 8 2s or 8 3s?
Good question.
2s, no.
Either way, I think a draw is very likely. Apparently, as well, which is just as well for Mike Tyson, given his business at the moment, there's been no drug testing for marijuana. That was officially in the thing. So he's managed to get through this.
It is 8 2s, because I remember they said they basically said, "Why are you treating us like women?" 12-ounce gloves, 8 2-minute rounds.
Draw.
So,
Draw. 10-1. Yes, please.
I mean, you've been right on the draw plenty of times before.
Yeah, I love a draw.
Okay, let's not spend no more time on that. In our final part, we will reflect on the news that Canelo Alvarez will be back in the ring and he will fight Callum Smith in a Christmas present for boxing fans. We waited a long time. It looked like Canelo would be out until next year, but instead, having split from Golden Boy and from DAZN, he's back on DAZN. And he will take on Callum Smith on December 19th in Texas with some fans as well. And I think we should probably give some credit to the Mexican for, fighting Canelo. There's been plenty of other options which were less than satisfactory, but Callum Smith, best super middleweight in the world, if you like, as in, genuine super middleweight, and credit all round, really.
I think
George.
So. I think. I'll tell you what. I think it's. I don't know where the sea changes come from, that idea of who's a premium opponent and who's not. But yeah, all credit to everyone involved. It's a great coming out of nowhere. What are we, a month out or something? Not even that. So yeah, wonderful opportunity for Callum Smith as well, because he hasn't always sort of crossed over in America, and even though he's one of the best, arguably the best at the weight in the world, it's not like he's well known over there. This is a chance to go and do that. I mean, he's up against it. But yeah, what a great fight to end the year on. A bit of an early Christmas present. I'd promise myself I wouldn't say that, but it is.
And you can argue, or Canelo can argue, George, that he's already won a super middleweight title, but with all due respect to Rocky Fielding, it wasn't this will properly show us at the level at which Canelo will operate as a super middleweight.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a strange one with Canelo now, because you try and pick the best super middleweight in the world, and you're like, well, where does Canelo fit in? But you go through his record. He has only ever boxed once as super middleweight, which was winning the belt against Rocky Fielding, which was the regular WBA and not the super, so not necessarily the full world title. All depends on who you are and whether people deem it's a full world title or not. And then obviously went up to light heavyweight and meet Kovalev. But there was always that thought process behind the Kovalev fight was, does Canelo just know something that, like, he just knows he's going to beat this guy and pick up that belt and become a 4-weight world champion? And he had no intentions of staying at light heavyweight. He's not a light heavyweight, so he's vacated the belt. And even after the Rocky Fielding fight, he's back down at middleweight, isn't he? He's boxed. I think he boxed Jacobs after that fight. And obviously he's had the bouts with Golovkin at middle. So this is interesting because Smith is a huge super middleweight, legitimate super middleweight, campaigned his entire career at super middleweight, won a world title at super middleweight. Does blow hot and cold, he's I think he does like to rise to the occasion if he thinks he's in a big fight. And this is obviously a huge fight for him, so you expect him to rise to the occasion. But with the fight being made on such late notice, what's his mindset like? What's his weight like at the moment? Was this just an opportunity that was too good to turn down? Or was he just totally bamboozled by the fact that he thought he was in line for a huge Canelo fight the first time, and then he thought he was in a negotiation, and then all of a sudden the rug was pulled from under his feet straight away? Why are either one of these two taking this fight? You assume that the Canelo fight is, for everyone else, it's like the Mayweather fight. You want it because you're going to earn great money on it, and you think you back yourself to win, and you think it's going to propel your career forward and to the next level. They're the two reasons that Callum Smith has took this fight. But would he take one without the other, or is this just the best of the situation that is right now? And if he doesn't take this fight right now, would he get another opportunity like it? Because he spent his whole career moving along at, not a lightning speed. There's times where I feel like he's treaded water. He's had real subpar performances throughout his career. His big win on the way through was beating Rocky Fielding in one round. And then he looked stale a few times since then. He beat me. He beat me in the World Boxing Super Series. So to become world champion, which was, where I felt like he probably thought he was all the doors going to open for him, and they kind of did and kind of didn't. Since then he had a good fight against Ndam on the undercard of Joshua Ruiz 1, and then I thought he lost the fight against John Ryder. So again, they're saying he's just flat subpar, but maybe not. Maybe the win against me was flattering. Maybe I wasn't fit. Who knows? So
you do,
yeah. But Canelo again, it's like, what's Canelo been through this year? What's on his mind? Why is he fighting on a month's notice? He's the biggest draw in boxing, and does he need the money? Like, what's going on? What's his purse? Because if you've signed a $35 million, $40 million a fight deal with DAZN, and then you're barely even into that contract and it's fell apart, and you've got to go, there's no one else at the table, you've got to go back to the same company and get less money for possibly a tougher fight because there's no marquee names out there for you. What's his temperament like for that? And this will be a step up, because if you exclude Kovalev, where I assume that he knew something about Kovalev. I know they'd done work together, they'd sparred out of the Sanchez gym and Big Bear and stuff like that before in the past, where I felt like he knew that Kovalev wasn't right for this fight, and he took that fight not long after boxing Anthony Yard. It was only literally a couple of months max. They've both been out of the ring for a year now. It's gonna be interesting. I don't think Callum Smith is good enough to compete with Alvarez, but is his height and reach and just each other's mind frame going into this, their fitness levels, will that play a dividend on the outcome? It's kind of fascinating. It's really kind of fascinating. Before the Alvarez Kovalev fight, I always thought that he wouldn't really dip his toe into the super middleweight division properly, Canelo. Yeah, he'd gone up to beat Rocky Fielding, who, just wasn't there that night. He was a bit vacant. He got caught and it was over. And I thought that would be enough for him. When I was still competing, that would be a fight that I would have loved to have pushed for with Alvarez, and just thought, I'm never going to get that because I'm too big for him. And he knows that. He might have, superior skill to the other super middleweights out there. And, he's got great hands speed. He's got every shot in the book. I mean, he's a class act. He's a fantastic fighter. He's a fighter who you would bring your students in to study, because he's just, some elements of his game is flawless. But giving away that height and reach and natural size against a guy who can switch it on like Callum Smith, we have seen him switch it on. But I don't know. I think it's really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. And we'll never know. That's maybe good, maybe bad. We'll never know. We'll never know whether Smith has just decided, well, I waited my whole career for big paydays. I got my big paydays in the World Boxing Super Series, where, which again was some tournament concept, and I was getting paid by, foreign investment. I've never earned money in the UK, like mega money like that. And this is going to be mega money. And if I win this, then I might get a return, or I might get a deal with independent deal with DAZN or someone else. Because the big names ain't there in the super middleweight division right now, and the light heavyweights where you feel Smith could go to, they're tough fights, harder fights probably than the super middleweights. But again, the names ain't really there. So I feel like this is an opportunity probably that he just was too good to turn down. He has to take it, whether it's the right thing for him or not. Who knows?
I think Canelo definitely seemed determined one way or another to fight this year. I don't know why, but he seemed adamant that he was going to squeeze one in. I think, of course, he was supposed to fight Billy Joe Saunders in May. I think at the time Billy Joe Saunders simply accepted less money, if I'm right in saying, and Smith basically said, no, this is what I want, and if you don't move, then I'm not going to move. So maybe it's not quite even, but do we look into anything? Do we look into the fact that Canelo did choose Saunders over Smith earlier this year, Dick?
I mean, you can if you want. I think the fact that Callum Smith is maybe the number one at the weight. I mean, it's an interesting question. Maybe they thought, and I know this for a fact, that they steered Canelo away from Billy Joe Saunders for a long time because he's just too slick, and it's not good. It's hard to look good against him because they had the problem with Erislandy Lara, and then if you look at all his opponents since then, basically they've been guys who he can hit and who he's going to entertain with, and they're promoters. They want to entertain people, so they didn't make any secret of that fact. So maybe that was it, and they just thought, I could catch up with Callum Smith. He's going to be there for me and I can hit him. And with Saunders, I'm going to be frustrated all night and this is a better style for me. So maybe it's that. I'm with George. I am surprised why he's done this, why he's decided to do it. I guess he's going to get paid an awful lot of money. And maybe there's something in the contract that said that if we approve an opponent, you have to take the fight because it's been a long year and he's been out of the ring and he's got this big contract. So maybe it's something contractual, but it's great for us as British fans because I thought we were going to not see the Callum Smith fight or maybe even not see the Billy Joe Saunders fight and he'd move on and do something else. So for me, this is the one fight I want to see him because he's a proper legitimate super middleweight in his prime, world champion. I think it's going to be a great fight. I can't pick it yet. I don't know what. I can't really see. It's hard to know how Callum Smith wins the fight, but is he like you've seen Canelo win these sorts of fights before? But is Callum Smith too big? Is he going to be too big and too powerful? What's going to happen when he gets hit by someone like that? We saw him get hit by Golovkin and he took it. So can Callum Smith do something better than Golovkin? Has the year of litigation and moaning and arguing and infighting with his promoters and stuff taken out of him? Is his mindset right? Is Callum Smith absolutely going to go out there like this is his one chance, his one and only chance? Or is he has the pandemic taken out of him as well in this time off? It's a fascinating fight, and I do love a December fight. Is it on? It's on DAZN over here, right? So it's like the big. They're going to be their big one after the Garcia Campbell fight fell out. So that's another big thing. And is it true that's $1.99 a month for UK fans?
Yeah, I mean it is, but I can't. That's surely an introductory offer.
Yeah.
But that fight will cost you in the UK $1.99. So
that's amazing.
I believe. Yeah. They're going to call it Christmas cracker as well, I've heard.
Well, it's better than season's beatings.
No, I like that. Anyway, obviously in a month's time or so, we'll have a full preview of that plenty of times. Canelo is currently the 9-2 on favourite, Smith 2-1, draw 22-1 with the early odds. Well, it's been a long show, but I feel a very thorough and worthwhile one. Not always worthwhile, but we've really got into a few topics this week. Thank you, Declan. Thank you, George. We'll be back next weekend to look back on Dubois, Joyce, and then to look ahead to the following weekend, which will be Anthony Yard's return. No Tyson Fury, but that card goes ahead. Anyway, please do, if you're watching, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening, do rate and review. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next week.